This video is a warning for the 2024 Florida housing market. And really, it's a warning for every housing market in the future. And while it's factually true that I'm not an economist and I'm not an analyst or an attorney or a CPA or a million other things, I was a stockbroker for 20 years and I'm a boots on the ground operator of a high performance real estate team. So I can accurately tell you exactly what's happening in our hyperlocal markets, but I would be completely irresponsible if I didn't at least share what I suspect will happen in the future. And many folks have asked me what I thought during the great financial crisis. What was I telling my clients when I was in the equities market, when I was trading stocks during the last epic meltdown? And way back when, I told clients the exact same thing that I'm telling you now, which is that the money printing and the stimulus and the bailouts are no bueno long term. They are not sustainable and they put us at risk. And here we are 10 plus years later, starting to feel that pain. But we're just at the beginning of feeling the pain. Things are just starting to break now. And what do we see? Inflation is through the roof. The housing market just lost $2.4 trillion worth of equity. Interest rates are soaring, and banks are starting to fail. And fear is on the uptick. And fear is paralyzing. And the only way to work through that fear and work through that panic is to be prepared and plan. Because the truth is, despite all of the bad news that might be inherent in the markets today, it's always a good market for someone. And markets will always trade, whether that's real estate, stock, or any other investment vehicle. But we must know what's going on right now in order to be able to make the best decisions for ourselves, for our families, and for our financial bottom line. And for some, buying a home right now is the right choice. And for others, waiting is better. But that's going to be determined by your individual circumstance and the market that you're shopping in. But today we're doing a deep dive into the long-term debt cycle, which must be addressed on a massive level by the United States of America, because if it's not, the results are very predictable. And we just experienced the first stage of bank failures, and we just saw Credit Suisse get bailed out by the Swiss Treasury. And despite all of that, the European Central Bank raised their rates by another 50 basis points despite the market turmoil. And just like our Fed has, just like Jerome Powell has told everyone he's going to do, the ECB has signaled for weeks that it would be raising rates again at its March meeting, as inflation across the 20-member region remains well above target, with February inflation of 8.5%, well above the central bank's target of 2%. And just like here, their markets bet that there was a possibility that given the recent shocks in the banking system, in the banking sector, with Credit Suisse under attack, and Credit Suisse has been under attack for a long time here, so this is nothing new, but their shares got decimated 30% yesterday in trading. But the thought was that increasing rates were breaking the system, just like they are here. Just like the market was betting that the Fed might slow down because they're breaking the banking system. And while it's yet to be determined what Jerome Powell's going to do, he's already told us what he plans to do. What he will do is yet to be determined. I don't know. But the banking system is breaking, because the banking system is not capitalized the right way. And regional banks are under attack. And this is just the start. And while I do think that housing and inflation will start to cooperate as we get into May, because it takes a long time for the housing market data to catch up to inflation, but I do think there's a very strong possibility that come May, when the housing numbers come in, housing and inflation start to cooperate quickly. But this is a near-term event. And what I'm about to share is a long-term event and a much more concerning reality. And please stick around until the end, because I'm also going to share the net population gain, the inflows and outflows of migration here in our local market, because I do believe that some markets are more insulated than others. But the long-term debt cycle is no bueno, and it's nobody's friend. And I'm going to start with an email that I received from Ray Dalio. And if you're not familiar with Ray, I would encourage you to Google him now. And so we're going to get into it right now, and we're going to cover what Ray shared in a LinkedIn article because he's been getting hammered by questions about what he thinks about the Silicon Valley Bank situation. And he goes on to say that this is a very classic event in the very classic bubble bursting part of the short-term debt cycle, which takes time. It typically takes 7 years, give or take about 3. But when we tighten money to curtail credit growth and inflation, it leads to a self-reinforcing debt credit contraction that takes place via a domino falling like contagion process that continues until central banks create easy money, which negate the debt credit contraction, which in turn produces more new credit and more debt. And from there, it creates the seeds for the next big debt problem until these short-term cycles build up the debt assets and liabilities to the point that they are unsustainable. And the whole thing collapses in a debt restructuring and debt monetization. And these things don't happen often. They typically happen once in a lifetime. They typically take about 75 years, give or take 25 years. So basically once every 100 years. So where are we on this timeline? Does this mean it's not really going to be us that feel this? Or is it going to be our kids or grandkids or other generations? Did the timeline start today or did it really start in the early 70s? He goes on to say, while in different cycles, the sectors that are in bubbles are different. In 2008, it was heavily in residential real estate. And now it's in negative cash flow venture and private equity companies, as well as commercial real estate companies that can't take the hit of higher interest rates and tighter money. The self-reinforcing contraction dynamic is the same. Based on his understanding of this dynamic and what is currently happening, bank failure is a canary in the coal mine and an early sign dynamic that will have knock-on effects in the venture world and well beyond it. Because one man's debts are another man's assets, and most people are levered long. When interest rates rise and money becomes tight, assets fall in value, which hurts debtors, creditors, asset holders, and financial intermediaries, which causes a self-reinforcing contraction and contagion because when money is needed, other assets are sold, and when creditors are hurt, they stop lending. And I'll link the article to this video so you can check it out yourself. And he's written plenty of books that cover this in great detail. I'd suggest that you check those out too. They are required reading. Which brings us to the much bigger long-term problem, which is that the US central government has large outstanding debts and is selling more debt than there is demand for. And central banks are monetizing that debt. Controlling the problems is financed by the central bank printing money and buying the debt. And with debt assets and debt liabilities so enormous, it is very difficult to keep real interest rates high enough for the lender creditors without making them too high for the borrower debtors. The really big problem will come when there is too much of this money printing to provide creditors with adequate real returns, which will lead them to start selling their debt assets, which will substantially worsen the supply-demand balance. And while people are not currently thinking about the next interest rate cut and qualitative easing by the Fed, we should be, because the likely outcome is a big decline in the value of our money. A big decline in the value of a dollar. And then he goes on to say that let's not forget about the internal conflict dynamic right now. Most importantly, the upcoming 2024 elections. And let's not forget about the fact that there are external conflicts that we must be aware of, like the US-China conflict and the US-NATO-Russia conflict, and others like Iran. But more importantly, he shares that this setup implies there is significant risk that there are likely to be bad financial and economic conditions at a time of bad internal conflict and bad international conflict, with the world being levered long. And from his perspective, the next 2 years look very risky. Now, to be clear, Ray Dalio has made billions of dollars trading around economic changes and risk. And while buying a home is not necessarily a trading philosophy, and I'm never going to time the top or the bottom of a market, in any market, I do know that cash will always seek its highest value and real estate will always trade. And it's always a good market for someone. But you must be prepared and you must know what's happening so that you can make the best decisions for yourself, for your family, and for your financial bottom line. Which brings me to supply and demand, specifically in the Palm Beach County, Broward County, and Dade County markets. Because there is a scarcity of land, because there is tremendous demand, and supply and demand will dictate how our market trades. And what you can see on this net inflow outflow migration map by county is that Palm Beach County has had a massive inflow of population. And the state of Florida has had a massive increase in inbound migration. Palm Beach County has had an uptick of 0.4% in 2021 and damn near a 13.5% increase in inbound population since 2020. And Broward County is a little bit different. There's been a downtick in 2021, but a major uptick of 10.5% in 2020. But the 305 is a little bit different. There's been a downtick of 1.44% from 2020 to 2021 and an increase since 2020 of 6.66%. Mark of the beast, no bueno. I'm going to round that up to 6.67 just for good measure, or 6.65 if you like that better. But I don't like this number, so we're going to change it just a little bit to make it more palatable. But if you look at Osceola County, it's been a major uptick, 50% in 2020, almost 4% in 21. And if you look at Sarasota, 3% in 21, 17, almost 18% in 2020. And in 2021, Pasco County has a net inflow of 4%, almost 26% relative to 2020. And I'm not going to do the whole state today, but you can clearly see that in Florida, there's been a massive uptick in inbound migration. And that massive uptick of inbound migration insulates many of those markets because there's not a whole lot of supply and there is tremendous demand. But to be clear, the lighter color is outward migration and the darker color is inbound migration. But this is also a lagging indicator. This is still a year off, which is why it's critical that we go to the Realtor stats, we go to the MLS, and we see what the 2022 domestic net migration is by state. And what you can see is Florida is at the top of the leaderboard. People are still wanting to move to Florida for all of the freedom that exists here and all the benefits of living here. And I'm not going to go into a big list of why you should move to Florida. I've done tons of that content already, and I suspect you already know. But Florida inbound migration has upticked across the board at almost 2%, followed by Texas and North and South Carolina, with much of the Northeast and the central parts of the state and California at the bottom of the list. Now, I hope you found this content valuable, and if you did, please subscribe to the channel. Give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend, and check out my next video because I suspect you will love it a lot. And until next time,